So the chance of it is higher than 2021, but it still wouldn't be my base case. I mean, my base case would be kind of choppy consolidation. I don't know if we're going to go to higher highs or if we're going to, just kind of stagnate. We could have a drawdown. Basically, when you have such a strong year, and then you have a pullback of fiscal monetary support, that can put some pressure on markets. And so a crash would not be my base case, but weaker market conditions would be. The ways to protect against it are to own some cash or bonds as a non-zero position so they can rebalance into the weakness of things you want to own, or to be long volatility, or to have other specific hedges, like some basically some puts or some long volatility plays that basically pay off if you get that downward volatility, that you can then use those gains to rebalance into, again, some of the assets you actually want to own. And so I think overall it is a time to be, somewhat defensive, which doesn't mean get out of everything that you want to own, but it means basically expect that it could happen so that you're not shocked if it happens and that you're ready to take advantage of it if it happens.
Yeah, it feels to me like the Fed's a bit stuck because they can't raise interest rates too much without crashing the market, but then they can't keep printing money now that inflation's at a 40-year high. So if there is a crash, what can or will the Fed be able to do?
So it would partially depend on what inflation is doing. If you see inflation maybe still hot, but it's maybe cooling off by that point, so it's a lower headline CPI or PCE than it is now, they could have some ammunition to come in and maybe do some more quantitative easing, for example. They have other programs in place too. They have repo, they have reverse repo. They could potentially reliquify the corporate market, the corporate bond market. So there are tools they can do. I think the bigger tools to look at, though, are fiscal policy. So people often, I think, assign too much power to the Fed, whereas a lot of what can drive markets and inflation and things like that is fiscal policy. So I think watching Congress, U.S. Congress, to see whether or not they pass some version of the Build Back Better plan. Right now, that's kind of been in limbo, right, because they had trouble getting votes in the Senate. But there are parts of that if passed, it would expand the money supply. It probably would increase nominal GDP, but also potentially increase inflation. So there's trade-offs there, and it's important, I think, to watch from a macro perspective. We're also seeing that for 2021, China was kind of the oddball compared to the rest of the world, because the rest of the world was still very, very loose, whereas they were tightening conditions. So they had a declining credit impulse. They were cracking down on their tech companies. They were purposely trying to deflate some of their real estate bubble, because China's got this huge real estate bubble, very leveraged. Whereas that seems like it's bottoming out. If you look at the Chinese credit impulse, it's kind of showing signs of bottoming out. If you also look at, politically, they have their 2022 National Congress, which is their every 5-year kind of reappointment of leaders. So it's kind of a politically sensitive year for them. They wouldn't want, very tough kind of conditions during that type of, in the lead up to that event. So I think 2022, you could see China potentially holding up markets to some extent as well, kind of reinflating some of the globe. So I think I would look more towards U.S. fiscal policy, European fiscal policy, and Chinese overall monetary and fiscal policy compared to just looking at the Fed. So I would say somewhere in the middle. I think one of the biggest challenges with the growth camp, let's say the Cathie Woods camp, is that a couple things. One is we've had this kind of exponential growth from Moore's law, right? So semiconductors keep getting more and more efficient, and then software has absolutely blossomed for decades. The internet, and then mobile internet, and then all the applications we built. And so that's been a very exponential area of growth. And I think it's a mistake when people apply that logic to hardware, especially coming from an engineering background. I just know there's so many more constraints for things in the real world. And an example I like to point out is that, the fastest passenger jet was built in 1969. And we still haven't built a faster one, right? So we're 50 years later. People back then thought by now we would look like the Jets, and we can't do it with what they did back then. The fastest manned military jet was the Blackbird. That was also like 50 years ago, 60 years ago. I forget the exact date. United States went through a period where we stopped the shuttle program but we delayed the next one. And so we had a 9-year period where we had to pay the Russians to bring American astronauts into space for the International Space Station, because we couldn't really do it. And so hardware and things like that tend to not be as exponential as people suspect. I'm also watching the commodity shortages, kind of the structural shortages as it relates to copper, nickel, even oil and gas to some extent, compared to the estimates that they're going to be using in, say, 2030. And so I think we're going to be running into some, commodity constraint.
Before we continue, help us clicking that YouTube like button and subscribe now to our channel. This shows the algorithm that you valued this information. And it helps us spread that message. Sharing is caring. And now, let's continue.
I have bad news for you. If you're not rich by now, you're screwed. And if you're in debt, you're even double screwed. How so, you might wonder? Well, the sad truth is that you're working your whole life to make someone else rich. The mega corporations, the banks, the politicians, everyone is getting richer. They get your money. And what is even worse, they get your time, they get your life. You are not even in a rat race, you're in a financial prison. But what could a solution for you look like? Honestly, I don't know, but I know what a solution for me would look like. It's very simple. I use whatever money I have and I multiply it with 1,000. This could make my life much easier and probably yours as well. If you have $1,000 available and multiply this with 1,000, I believe that this could solve some financial issue for the one or the other. Of course, if you're ugly, you would have to multiply it with much more than 1,000. My name is Markus Dahn, and this is what I decided to do. I decided to 1000x my money. This is not a joke. I know what you may be thinking. What is this guy talking about? How should this work? This is not possible. Well, I made a detailed video where I laid out my plan. And some clever folks might even want to look at this plan and copy it and do exactly what I do. This is just a little hint on the side. You have two options. You leave, you forget what you have seen. You do whatever you're doing and you hope that somehow you get some other results. Good luck with that. Or you click the link below the video. You enter your email address because I'm not showing this to everybody. You at least watch my video on how I plan to 1000x my money. The choice is yours. Make the right choice. Join me. See what a different future you could have. See at least how I intend, how I plan to do the 1000x. So click on the link below, enter your email address, and I see you on the other side. Your Markus Dahn.